Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We're going to take a look today at a UK classic. We're looking at SLAINE the Horned God #1. I'm going to default to the pronunciation of Slain. I'm not for sure if that's correct. That accent over the A is kind of messing with me. I believe the correct pronunciation should be Slanya, but as far as I can tell, pretty much everybody calls it SLAINE. I think even down to the people who work at Fleetway. At least some of them. I guess the definitive question is whether or not Pat Mills calls it SLAINE. Just checked. Looks like he does. Okay, so we're going with SLAINE. So I suppose this is what you get when you get British writers writing about Irish characters. Good to know North Americans aren't the only ones who mispronounce this shit. So anyway, the character of SLAINE, he's a character that started popping up at the magazine 2000 AD, produced by Fleetway, in 1983. And essentially he's a very Conan-like character. You know, wanders around, gets in adventures, fights monsters and barbarians, beds wenches. Only the actual background is based in Celtic mythology, so drawing off characters like Cuchulainn. And the character seemed to strike a nerve. It stuck around for, quite a while. Most importantly for this video, it was able to stick around through those first 6 years, building up lore, telling the tale of SLAINE, who is an outcast from his tribe, goes wandering around, meets his dwarf companion, Uko, and eventually returns back to the tribe to become king. The series was come up with by Pat Mills, the writer. It was originally drawn by his wife, Angela Kincaid, and then the art duties were taken over by Massimo Belardinelli and Mike McMahon. No, not the Mike McMahon who did one of the variant covers for Blood Force. Shockingly, I know. This is longtime British artist Mike McMahon, who drew the early adventures of Judge Dredd. So they picked up another couple of artists along the way, including Glenn Fabry. Then they handed off the reins to a young guy named Simon Bisley. Simon Bisley had just started drawing comics a couple of years before this. I assume was reading comics before he started working in them, but it wasn't really his focus. He had started out doing album covers and magazine covers, t-shirt designs, that kind of thing. Instead of drawing, he'd come up with featuring Fleetway characters into Fleetway, and they immediately snapped him up and got him to work drawing ABC Warriors. At this time, he didn't know anything about drawing panel-to-panel work, but I assume the thinking was along the lines of, this guy's so good, we have to try and see if we can make a comic artist out of him. And, he's a young guy, and he does the young guy thing, where he wears his influences on his sleeve. He was very heavily influenced by Frank Frazetta. If we're just sticking with comic influences, there's also Richard Corbin and Bill Sienkiewicz mixed in there. And he stuck on ABC Warriors for a couple of years, then they shifted him on to SLAINE, and this is the book that turned Simon Bisley into a rock star. And I'm talking about when they were doing signings in London, there were lineups around the block. So time to finally dive in and see what the fuss was about. Since this is October, I was thinking, well, there's some like horror adjacent content in this. Not so much in this issue, really, other than just like a few weird looking pages. So it's not entirely appropriate for the month, but like, fuck it. This thing's awesome. So we're just going to go through it and pretend like it's a horror book, right? Yeah. So this is a 1989 publication. We can start with the cover. These covers look like they were done after the entire thing was completed, as we can see here, signed by Bisley in 1990. Very nice looking cover. Not going too hard for dynamic feel on this. We're just kind of showing off the quality of the book, really. And they're really focusing on that with this. They're going with the high gloss cover on the cardstock. All the paper is like a higher weight than usual. Maybe the only thing that's a bit of a drag in this is that the color has a bit of a washed out effect in the original publications here. The new trades seem to have much better transfers, where the color is much more vibrant. So if you're thinking about checking these out, that's probably the way to go, is to find one of the newer collections. So this is how we're going to kick things off, with kind of a frontispiece that really is going to kind of sum up the series. This is SLAINE here. We can tell by his tartan. And he's got a whole bunch of artifacts with him that he's going to be, I believe this is the focus of this series, is just going around and finding all of these different weapons to use in his quest to become king of all. But, wild cover by a dude who, started out doing album covers. That tracks. A lot of really vibrant color going on. Apparently, all this stuff in here, this isn't, like, it looks like it must be airbrush. Apparently, it's spray paint, like aerosol cans. I did note on his bio, it listed among his influences, like graffiti artists, which, that would account for this. It doesn't say anywhere that he was a graffiti artist himself, although that would kind of stand to reason, seeing with the results he's getting, where he would just, lay down a coat of red and then paint into it with the background. And he's doing that all over, and he's patterning himself after Bill Sienkiewicz in that way. I believe Bill Sienkiewicz is probably using airbrushes himself at this point. But these are the tools that Simon Bisley has, trained on, so that was what he was going to use. An absolutely wild spread to start things off. No context whatsoever. The first bit of this is going to be all about backtracking, essentially, like covering our bases, filling in on backstory. Because we've got a few years worth of lore to fill you in on if this is your first experience with the character of SLAINE. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to start with SLAINE's dwarf companion, Ukko. This is later on. This is after basically the events of SLAINE's life, when Ukko's an old dwarf and he's kind of writing his memoirs, Bilbo style. So this first bit here, Ukko's just kind of going to tell us his deal, who he is, why he's bothering to write anything, and set the scene a little bit. Basically, this is pre-Christian Ireland. This is a time of gods and magic and monsters and warrior kings, not to put too fine a point on it. And Simon Bisley is going to have some fun early on with like the design on Ukko here. Reminds me a little bit of Brian Froud. I'm not sure if that was a direct influence, although, Brian Froud's Goblins works were definitely in the public eye at that point. And more metal album stuff to kick things off with. Again, you see that spray paint all over the place here. He's really laying it on here. I saw a bit of an interview with him where he was saying how this is the first time he's painting, which I assume means the first time he's getting paid for painting, apart from a cover for ABC Warriors. Because very obviously this would not be the first time anybody's doing this shit. But it's still, I guess he's never really had the validation of having, like an editor say, yes, that's fucking excellent. Keep going with whatever the hell you're doing there. So, I mean, he is relying on the stuff probably that he picked up, doing album covers, doing the magazine covers, but he's also going to be doing a lot of experimenting over the course of this series. So, for instance, in issue 2, he starts going into watercolor, which I don't think is something that he used at all, at least, in a published sense before this. So we're going to fill you in a little bit on the most significant events in SLAINE's history. So we got to tell you about the Drunes, which seem to be basically a rival clan that are kind of sprung off of druids, and their leader, the Lord Weird Slaufeg, who they do just call the Lord Weird every once in a while. So anyway, Ukko here is going to tell us basically how the land was divided up back in the day. So this is Tir na Nog, the north of which is ruled by the free tribes that worship Danu, the earth goddess, and Lug, the sun god. And then in the south, that's where the Drunes rule. And they owe their allegiance to Carnoon, the horned god, and the bloody maggot Crom Cruach. So here's where we get the history of SLAINE. SLAINE was a member of the northern tribe of the Cessair, but had been exiled for making love to the king's chosen one, Niam. Just 16 years old, he'd wandered south and been fortunate enough to meet me. So that's Ukko. I had accidentally alerted the Drunes we were here to rescue the Druness Medb from becoming the bride of Crom. So basically what that means is that they had built this giant wicker man to sacrifice people to the god Crom Cruach. SLAINE and Ukko had been captured. They were also trapped inside the wicker man, along with Medb or Niam, one of the two. They could even be the same person. I'm not even 100% for sure. But she'd been all kind of twisted up by the thinking of the Drunes. I believe she's a Drune herself. And she wanted to be a bride of Crom Cruach, so she was trying to get sacrificed so that, she could meet her god. So when SLAINE comes to her rescue, he busts her out of the head of the wicker man. She's furious with him and she swears an oath of vengeance against him. And we get a brief look at SLAINE's superpower. Essentially, he has the power of the warp spasm. So if he gets into a pent-up state, then his flesh warps and he turns into a gigantic berserker monster, which Simon Bisley is only too happy to illustrate here. But already some fantastic looking stuff. There's all that Frazetta musculature in here. He's doing that spray paint. This is, when you know that he's using spray paint over top of this to make this fog, you can see exactly what he's doing. It doesn't matter because it still looks fantastic. And these are some great looking flames when he's using the power of the warp spasm. And just, twisting that body all over the place, just bulging it out in every direction here. That's fantastic looking stuff. We get a very truncated history for the rest of this here. We worked as laborers on Niam's dragon farm where the young reptiles were bred for their diamond skulls and jeweled eyes, before flying on to Dinas Emrys, the eternal fortress on the Nucker, her great stud dragon. If you're not familiar with these characters, this is kind of all nonsense language, really, and we're not getting enough of the backstory. These aren't getting fleshed out enough where these names really mean anything at this point. That'll change at least. This is just a huge info dump to start out with. And as the story progresses, you can start picking out names and events and all that and go, okay, this is what that means. A fun bit here where, we're getting through Uko's telling of the tale, and then we just kind of get an A-side saying, in Uko's original Ogham manuscript, there then follows a rather personal description of Niam, dwelling at unnecessary length on her physical characteristics. This has then been crossed through by another neater hand, but is still readable. The identity of this censor becomes clear as Uko's saga continues. So, Uko's a bit of a lech, which is kind of an important thing to know. Like, he's not just typical, faithful companion. He's not like the plucky mascot kid. Like, he's an asshole by the sound of it. And Slaine's relationship with him is basically, he uses him, but he also really seems to resent having to use him and will often just beat the shit out of him. This stuff here, it's fairly self-explanatory, I guess, once you realize what Simon Bisley is doing. But it is just what it looks like, where it's a pencil sketch, and then Simon Bisley spray paints over it. So later on, Slaine and Uko do meet back up with Niam. They kind of stumble upon her. That's when Uko goes into his unnecessarily long description of her physical characteristics. And then later on, they reunite again. And Slaine learned that he now had a son, Kai, who she was taking to the Druid Seminary at Durrington. And Slaine isn't too happy that his son is going to be a druid. He thought he'd be like a warrior king, like himself. He's no longer 16. He's returned back to his tribe, and he's taken over. And Niam doesn't seem to be set on fulfilling her vow of, avenging herself of Slaine, at least not in terms of like trying to kill him. I don't know if that would be possible, but she is going to at least still harbor a grudge against him, and she's not going to let their son become another Slaine. And at least as far as we know here, this is the last time Slaine is ever going to see them. At least that's Niam's intention. But, very nice looking stuff. Like, this stuff here looks absolutely great. A little bit of a Frazetta in the pose, but I think this is largely just Biz, kind of trying to branch out a little bit. Meanwhile, in Mirius, capital of Slaine's tribe, King Rhagal, Slaine's foster brother, had surrendered to the Fomorians. The offspring of Chaos and Old Night, these sea devils were also the allies of the Droon Lords. So, okay. Maybe I got that wrong. This is all, like, kind of complicated, convoluted, and I'm really not sure what the timeline is here. It looks like Slaine's brother is... Okay, maybe he's the king. And he got seduced by his wife here and persuaded to basically abdicate all power to the Caesarians. And this was actually Medb, who had changed her appearance and been sent north by Slaufeg to cause trouble amongst the northern tribes. If the whole book was like this, I think we'd be in trouble. It does get to be a straightforward narrative eventually, thankfully. In the meantime, there is awesome Simon Bisley art. So, for instance, the whole deal with the kings of the tribe is that they're only supposed to rule for 7 years, and then basically they commit ritual suicide, carried out by their druids. So that would be one of the druids in this case. And then we get an extended bit here with Uko and his companion. I'm not sure who the girl is, but she does seem to have joined them on their adventures, at least at some point. And she keeps cussing them out and telling them to stay on track and actually do the thing properly. You skipped over a whole bunch of adventures here. You missed the whole thing with the Cauldron of Blood, how it's given to Slaine by the ever-living ones. And he's like, oh, do I have to go into that? And he's like, yes, you fucking do. It's kind of central to the whole Horned God storyline. It's the legendary Cauldron of Plenty, inspiration, and regeneration, not to mention it's the entrance to the other world, which is where things are eventually going to lead to in this issue. So then he gives you the most truncated explanation possible for those events. And then we're going to get some splash pages. Yay! This is the kind of thing where I kind of wish I'd read the Slaine adventures leading up to this so that I would have a clearer idea of what exactly is going on. It does get a little difficult to keep up, even around this point, because this is still sort of boiled down explanations of adventures that we've already seen. But in the meantime, check out these splash pages, eh? Apparently these are done on just gigantic sheets of paper. This is A2 paper, which is like 16 by 24. And Biz is just going nuts. All this stuff here, this is meant to be Slaine himself, I believe, when he returns back to his tribe and assumes the throne. And all this stuff in here, this is all tech that he's been working on ABC Warriors. He's kind of developing there. Mixed with a very Frazetta-esque Deer Moose, and then some Bill Sienkiewicz stuff in the back here. So they were gifted with the Cauldron of Blood, and invigorated by the food from the magical cauldron, Slaine's tribe found new hope and fought off the Sea Devils, so the Caesarians. Some even charging into battle Skyclad, so they could draw on the magical power of the goddess Danu, so the Earth goddess. And Skyclad would just be dicks out. And all while Danu watched on in her guise as the Three Ladies. Anybody who's read some Sandman books knows that Three Ladies pops up all over the world, all sorts of different kinds of cultures, maiden, mother, and crone. But absolutely wild looking stuff. Like the contrasting colors too, to kind of offset each other. And okay, so when they were charging against the Caesarians vastly outnumbered Slaine's tribe, but Slaine invoked the warp spasm, went into his berserker rage with his giant axe Brainbiter, and just started plowing through Caesarians, knocking down hundreds. Which is good. You know, that's never exactly a bad thing. The only problem, of course, is that the Caesarians don't number in the hundreds, they number in the thousands, maybe the tens of thousands. Maybe more. Probably not more. It's Ireland in, like, 3rd century or whatever. But regardless, Slaine and his warriors are still grossly outnumbered. So Slaine's first idea was to join alliances with other tribes of the north to join against the Caesarians. But nobody else in his tribe would go for that, so the next thing he can think to do is to go after weapons with magical properties. We get our cool shot here of Slaine sitting in his throne in his tribal tartan, wearing a gleaming new silver hero harness. So he's going to have a discussion with Cathbad, his druid. And he's talking about how, okay, so we have the Cauldron of Blood. That's great. That does help us quite a bit. But if we're going to defeat the Druins, we need to have all of the artifacts from all of the other tribes as well. So, in Gorias, it's the silver sword of the moon that can cut through any metal. In Phineas, the flaming spear of the sun that is alive and thirsty for slaughter. And in Phalius, a holy stone of destiny that cries aloud when the rightful high king stands upon it. And Cathbad is like, so, and you assume that'll be you? And Slaine's response is basically like, well, that would be nice, but, you know, you never know. And yeah, now we're going to get some 9-panel grids, which is a little strange, but apparently Simon Bisley enjoys drawing facial expressions, you know, just like drama-type stuff as much as he likes drawing badass splashes. So Cathbad warns that this is just not a good idea. These are the fabled weapons of Atlantis, and the wielding of these weapons was what brought Atlantis to ruin and sunk the city. Is that what you want from Tir na Nog? And Slaine figures, well, if I have these weapons, I can put an end to war. And Cathbad's like, yeah, you're not the first person to think that. Every king thinks wonder weapons will fix all of their problems, and for some reason it never does. And Slaine drops back to, we don't have any alternative. And the druid, of course, says, well, prayer is an alternative. We should be praying to the gods. You know, maybe they'll help us out. Maybe they won't, but then that's our lot, and we can, you know, fight our best, and we'll either be rewarded here or in the next life. And it just kind of turns into a religious argument from there. But these are great-looking expressions. Again, for a dude who hasn't been drawing, like, panel-to-panel work for very long, he sure as hell got a handle on it pretty damn quick. So the conversation basically ends with Slaine going, fuck it, I want those weapons, I don't give a shit what you say. And the druid's like, look, you can't defy your druid. I'm the highest authority in the land. I'm above even the king. And it's like, yes, but you're not above the gods. So I'm just going to go talk to the gods directly. I'm going to go climb into the Cauldron of Blood. So that's where our story's going. We do a quick cut with Uko here, who's been partying a fair bit, and happens to overhear a conversation between, I believe that's Medb, and she's asking some little goblin dude here for a meeting with the Lord Weird. So this doesn't get wrapped up for this issue. I assume this is further down the road, as Uko follows the goblin through the streets here. And you can see a lot of that Sienkiewicz influence on these pages. Again, with that spray paint, it's all over the place. And Bisley was saying that these panels here, with the silhouette, with not much in the way of background, that's particularly influenced by Sienkiewicz. So, Slaine is prepping himself to enter the Cauldron of Blood and speak directly to, I think it's Duna? Pretty close. Danu. Okay. And Cathbad has one more warning. He's like, you know what? If you get all these artifacts, there's a good chance you're going to restore the power of Carnun, the Horned God. And he's the god of the Druins, apparently, or he's one of the gods of the Druins. His cult dates back to the ancient times when Feg first emerged from his cave of beasts to a dark age when witches ruled the earth. And Slaine's like, I don't know anything about that, but sure. So he hasn't been told about this because they want to hush it all up. Apparently, there was a time where their society was more matriarchal. Witches ran the show, and they were all about, getting down, really. Which is bad. Can't do that. Can't model a society over that anyway. Or I guess that's Cathbad's thinking. So if the Horned God were to return, he will usher in a new age of witchcraft, devil worship, and unspeakable practices. Not the unspeakable practices. Please, anything but that. So at that, Slaine's kind of heard enough for now. He's not going to be swayed from his course. So with one last kind of telling off of the druid, he climbs into the Cauldron of Blood and starts sinking basically into his subconscious. So while he's swimming in his subconscious, we get these crazy blues where we really haven't been seeing that up until now. he starts hearing the voice of Danu in his head. So that's the Earth Goddess. And she approves of the fact that he's bypassing the druids and speaking directly to her. And that nobody really does that kind of shit anymore. So not only is he going to be diving into his subconscious, he's diving into kind of a communal subconscious with those of his tribe, or with his race, basically the Irish. And it says, race memories of a bygone era when for 200,000 years men worshipped a goddess and there were no gods. An era when women looked after the earth. An era men have conveniently chosen to forget or deny, yet secretly yearn to return to, even though they dread it. So, while he's swimming around in this collective subconscious, he's going to have to deal with, like demons, essentially, materializations of fears of returning to the lost era of women. And that's okay with SLAINE, because he doesn't really have any kind of fears like that. Says SLAINE didn't find the idea of women originally being in control as difficult to accept as many men would. Consequently, his demons weren't impossible to overcome, so he's able to, take care of them fairly easily, really. For he had been trained by women at their military school at Alba, and they'd told him how witches had always taught the great Celtic heroes their martial arts, so such an age made sense to him. And although he was a Sun King, which is the title that his tribe bestows upon him, husband of the Earth Goddess, he'd always seen himself more as a consort than as a master. Nevertheless, he had developed a taste for power, and his motives for wanting to be High King were not altogether selfless. There was the prospect of being remembered for all time as a mighty and immortal king, so his demon of ambition was enormous and particularly foul. And it was some time before he very reluctantly finished it. So he's having to, knock down his fears, his ambitions, one by one, so that he can come to the Earth Goddess with sort of a clean slate, I suppose. And he does eventually meet her here, and she's got like these kind of nixies around her, who act as kind of a peanut gallery, basically making fun of SLAINE anytime he says anything. So he says he's come to ask her permission to go and seek for the treasures. And she's like, are you ready to pay the price? Are you ready to follow in the way of the Horned God? And he's like, you know what? I have no idea. I don't know exactly what that is. Why don't you tell me? Great looking visual stuff going on here. I assume this is all being done outside of regular sketch. I'm not even sure how long these parts would have been, because these all would have been just kind of chapters in 2000 AD. So I imagine just like 8 pages at a time, but you're getting them like every week or something like that. So, it still works out to a ton of comics. And I imagine you still got to go at a pretty high pace. So I would think that this is done outside of the normal schedule. So SLAINE's going to go for a walk with Danu, and she's going to basically explain what the deal with the Horned God is, which is that he's an early god of nature, of fertility. Danu says that he was the first of her gods, the only one who never betrayed her, which is probably why some call him the devil. He's also not a particularly serious god. He kind of laughs at the world, says he sees the ridiculousness of life. He never takes its pressures too seriously. He sees the laugh of it all. He sees the game for what it is. He is the laughter in the woods. And the difficulty with this is that since SLAINE is a Sun King, he also follows their Sun God, and the Sun God is obsessed with authority, with conquering everything. Those heroes who follow his path are usually mindless and violent. So the deal with following the way of the Horned God is that the Horned God is not afraid to show weakness. He seeks peace rather than war, cooperation rather than strife, and couldn't give a damn about power. So very different from SLAINE's usual thing as a Sun King. And we get this crazy page here that I'm not sure whose idea this was. I'm thinking this was maybe Bisley, where Danu is basically talking about how bad of an idea it would be for a Sun King to pursue these weapons. She's like, can you imagine a Sun hero with a fiery spear that screams for blood and is never tired of slaughter, or a sword that can cut through any metal? Or think of a Sun hero with a stone that made him High King of all the tribes. He'd kill and maim and destroy everything that moved. He'd become corrupted by power, ruining and polluting the earth, turning my body into sour land. And Bisley decided to just have her kind of lose her mind for a little bit here, just making all sorts of crazy faces. But, she's one of the gods, I guess, and the gods aren't necessarily sane, so that's okay. So they're going to go back and forth a little bit, talking about Ukko a little bit, saying how it was, that was maybe the worst thing that could have happened was SLAINE hooking up with him. They're going to talk about the Lord Weird Slaufeg, and how basically he's like a corrupted version of the Horned God, and he needs to be killed and replaced. So Danu will endorse this mission. It's just that in order to take it, SLAINE has to promise to become the new Horned God. So ruling with reason and compassion as opposed to ambition and bloodlust. And then she basically dismisses him, leads him back to the pool, where he gets sucked back into the group subconscious, and he can begin his mission in earnest. And that's kind of where we're going to end things for today. But crazy looking book, like everything in here. There's very little where Bisley is taking like a panel off or, like just kind of hurrying it up a little bit to try and get the book done in time. So yeah, I assume he's able to work on this on his own schedule. Some of the ads for these things are fucking crazy too. Anyway, that is it for SLAINE the Horned God, number 1. We didn't really get too much of the story there, did we? That was pretty much all backstory. It certainly helped that we got so many awesome Simon Bisley splashes in there. And even the stuff that was just, regular panel-to-panel work, where we're just doing like 2 shots, back and forth in a conversation. He's still finding ways to liven those up. But yeah, so this is, the kind of culmination shot with SLAINE wielding he's got the blood cauldron, he's got the rock that proclaims him the High King, he's got the spear that's got the bloodlust, and the sword that cuts through any metal. So I assume that's his inevitable fate. And he's got, the horns and everything. So that's at least what Danu wants him to become. And yeah, so like I said, this is the book that propelled Simon Bisley to superstardom, to the point where most people who know about SLAINE, if you ask them which SLAINE is the definitive one, this is the one they talk about. Doesn't matter that there's guys who worked on this who, maybe had more chops. Glenn Fabry, when he was working on this, he probably had quite a bit more experience at this time. But I've seen Simon Bisley compared to like a Jim Lee, where he more like took kind of the kernels of a lot of different styles that were certainly good and popular, in their own right, among their particular crowd, and then combined them in a way where it became suddenly more poppy. And that was what he was able to latch into, that just kind of drove his career like on a huge upward trajectory. Which is interesting because, it's not like, Simon Bisley isn't an incredible artist in his own right. It's just that he kind of picks the more sensational aspects of guys like Frazetta or Sienkiewicz or whichever. The stuff that's kind of bombastic and it really grabs onto an audience. Again, it's the same thing with Jim Lee, where Jim Lee has very good fundamentals, but nobody gives a shit about Jim Lee's fundamentals. It's the fact that he draws Wolverine leaping with both hands going forward and the claws out, which is what everybody wants to see. Like, you just want to see Simon Bisley drawing superheroes in awesome heavy metal album cover poses. And that's what you get every time. So I'm going to see about maybe picking up more of these. They are a little bit on the pricier side, but it would be nice to figure out, if the story's good too, because we didn't really get any of that. We just kind of got all the lore, all the lead up. I don't really have too much of a problem with it, though. I think this was still money well spent. So anyway, that is going to do it for this one. Thanks very much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Helps with all the algorithm stuff. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And if you really want to help out, in the description, there's a link to my Patreon. And if you go subscribe there, that'll give you access to everything I do. So all sorts of videos, everything to do with the Blood Force comic, including everything to do with the Blood Force Kickstarter. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. So yeah, that'll do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.